Good morning and welcome. My name is Nicole Olson and I serve on your fellowship board of directors. I want to thank all of you for being here today and extend a special welcome to any visitors. If you'd like more information about the fellowship, please visit the welcome table in the fireside room or sign our virtual guest book at uufames.org/guestbook. Whether joining us from home or here in the fellowship, we invite you to stay after the service for coffee, where you can introduce yourself and join in conversation with kindred spirits. So, on behalf of this caring, nurturing congregation, I welcome each and every one of you to this sacred space. Here, we invite you into an experience of transformation, hope, renewal, and connections, which may inspire you to understand life in new ways. Thank you for joining us today.
I'm Sarah Carlson from the Sunday Services Committee, and this morning it's my great pleasure to welcome Birch Spick back to the UUFA. Birch is currently a seminarian at Meadville Lombard, just began this year, and also works full-time at the the Unitarian Church in Des Moines, First Unitarian, as program staff, and has been there for about a year, holding everything together regarding programming. And many of you may remember Birch from when they were a student here at Iowa State University, came in and helped to organize the campus young adult group and had been part of the Sunday Service Committee, provided services here, and was very involved. So please join me in welcoming Birch Spick today.
We each come from different places in life, seeking words which capture awe when we have no words. So we gather here in fellowship. We each come with deep and shallow hurts, longing for comfort in word, song, and presence. So we gather here in fellowship. We each come from different places in life, needing to find our center and sometimes to be shaken from it. So we gather here in fellowship. Poetry can nurture us, comfort us, center us, and sometimes perturb us out of the comfortable centers of our lives. It can inspire us with awe and can help us see and consider things in ways we hadn't before. Through its contemplative and awe-inspiring capacities, it can approach prayer and spiritual language. It shows us that there are no unsacred places, even among texts we may not usually regard as sacred scripture. With these things in mind and in heart, let us celebrate the meaning we make and find in poetry.
Awe, centering, transcendence. As each of these are flames within us, may we light our chalice in their spirit and search for them in this holy place. Please rise as you're willing and able and join in singing our first song, number 108, My Life Flows On in Endless Song.
My life goes on in
If you are a young person or young at heart, I invite you to come up to the front for our time for all ages this morning. Our story today, come up. It's good to see you all today. Thank you for being here. Our story today is Daniel Finds a Poem by Misha Archer. Daniel knows all the rocks, trees, and animals in the park. On Monday morning, Daniel sees something new on the park gate. A sign reads, "Poetry in the Park, Sunday at 6 o'clock." "What is poetry?" Daniel says. He looks up in surprise when he hears spiders say, "To me, poetry is when morning dew glistens." On Tuesday, Daniel climbs the old oak tree. He sees Squirrel. "Squirrel, do you know what poetry is?" "Poetry is when crisp leaves crunch," Squirrel tells him. On Wednesday, Daniel calls into Chipmunk's hole and he asks, "Chipmunk, can you tell me what poetry is?" And Chipmunk says, Poetry is a home with many windows in an old stone wall." On Thursday, Daniel makes a boat with a leaf for a sail and watches the wind carry it across the pond. He says quietly to Frog, "Excuse me, Frog, what is poetry?" "Poetry," says Frog, "is a cool pool to dive into." On Friday, Daniel parts the cattails and finds Turtle. "Hello, Turtle. I have a question. Do you know what poetry is?" "I think poetry is sun-warmed sand," says Turtle. On Saturday afternoon, Daniel finds Cricket in the shade of the slide. When the shadows are long, Cricket fills the air with music. "Is this poetry to you, Cricket?" "Singing at twilight when the day is done?" "Indeed it is, Daniel." That night, moonlight fills Daniel's room. Here's a whoo, whoo, whoo. Leaning from his window, he calls to Owl, "Owl, what is poetry?" "Oh, poetry. Poetry is bright stars in the branches, moonlight on the grass, and silent wings to take me wherever I go. Good night, dear Daniel," she whispers, and flies off into the night. On Sunday, the sun wakes up Daniel. He is happy when he remembers it's Sunday. "Today is poetry in the park," says Daniel, "and I have a poem." Morning dew glistens, crisp leaves crunch. There's a home with many windows in the old stone wall. Cool pools to dive in, sun-warmed sand to lie in. Singing at twilight when the day is done. Bright stars in the branches, moonlight on the grass, and silent wings to take me wherever I go. On the way home, Daniel stops to watch the sunset reflecting in the pond. "That looks like poetry to me." "Me too," says Dragonfly. Thank you all for joining us, and you can stay up here or go join your families back in the chairs.
We have a meditation this morning. How to Be a Poet by Wendell Berry. Make a place to sit down. Sit down. Be quiet. You must depend upon affection, reading, knowledge, skill, more of each than you have, inspiration, work, growing older, patience, for patience joins time to eternity. And readers who like your poems doubt their judgment. Breathe into the unconditional, with unconditional breath, the unconditioned air. Shun electric wire. Communicate slowly. Live a three-dimensional life. Stay away from screens. Stay away from anything that obscures the place it is in. There are no unsacred places. There are only sacred places and desecrated places. Accept what comes from silence. Make the best you can of it, of the little words that come out of silence, like prayers prayed back to the one who prays. Make a poem that does not disturb the silence from which it came.
We gather in this space, in this holy hour, to be present with one another. Our journey through this life is a journey of balance filled with both sorrows and joys. We take this time to uplift the milestones in our lives, both joyous and sorrowful. If you have a milestone to share, please come up to the microphone for those of you joining us here in Fellowship Hall. And I will light a candle to honor what you bring with you. We will start in Fellowship Hall and then transition to those attending by Zoom. As we share deeply, may we also be present deeply. We light a third candle for all that we carry with us in silence of our hearts. May we honor all that we have shared together, all those joys and sorrows which we carry with us, though they may remain silent in our hearts.
see, they don't have, Bradley isn't there anymore, so it may be the person who's doing this is not quite up to it. It says what we have. It says the speaker, gallery. Well, that's everybody, but we're not hearing anything. So it says view gallery. I don't know why we're not hearing anything. We should. Participants. There's chat.
Reading this morning is by Mary Carr, Facing Altars, Poetry, and Prayer. Poetry is a healing balm, partly because it's always helped me feel less alone. Even in earliest childhood, poets were my first priests, and poetry itself my first altar. It was a lot of other firsts too, of course. First classroom, chat room, confessional. But it was most crucially the first source of awe for me because it eased a nagging isolation. It was a line thrown to my drear-minded self from seemingly glorious others. In my godless household, poems were the only prayers that got said.
Oh, that's too bad.
Sacred speech at all. I remember Mother bringing me T.S. Eliot's poems from the library. She not only swooned over them, she swooned over my swooning over them, which felt as close as she came to swooning over me. Poetry was the family's religion. Beauty bonded us. With both prayer and poetry, we use elegance to exalt, but we also beg and grieve and tremble. We suffer with prayer and poetry alike. In a time of crisis, the end of my marriage, someone gave me a prayer from Saint Francis of Assisi. It's one of those prayers that cradle Catholics can resent having drilled into them. But I started saying it to my 4-year-old son every night. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Even for the blithely godless, these wishes are pretty easy to choke down. I mean, it's not hard to believe that if you can become an instrument for love and pardon rather than wallowing in self-pity, then your life will improve. Within a year of starting the prayer, my son told me he wanted to go to church to see if God's there. Perhaps the only reason that could have roused me
What's
from
that?
times.
Well, I don't know.
Just started, a little voice came through, but it's just,
Entirely for my son's benefit.
I don't know. What a shame.
Prayer life. I still had small use for organized religion. The Catholic Church one pal took us to was repugnant, ideologically speaking. It set my feminist spikes prickling. But the church's carnality, which seemed crude at the outset, worked on me. Through the simple physical motions I followed during Mass, me following something, our bodies standing and sitting and kneeling in concert, I often felt my mind grow quiet and my surface differences from others began to be obliterated. So the bovine exercises during Mass made me feel like part of a tribe in a way, and the effect carried over in me even after church. Poetry had worked the same way. I've written elsewhere of its Eucharist qualities. In memorizing the poems I loved, I ate them in a way. I breathed as the poet breathed to recite the words. Someone else's suffering and passion enters your body to transform you, partly by joining you to others in a saving circle. In language, I'd found a way out of myself. To my mother, then to a wider community, the poets I imagined for years, then to a poetry audience for which I wrote, then to the Lord, who paradoxically speaks most powerfully to me through quiet.
As you came into this space, a member of this community handed you a piece of paper and a pencil. And as you came into the digital Zoom space, you may have noticed four phrases.
You're muted.
Are you hearing something?
Yes, I saw a message.
Susan,
13 words.
I'm not plugged in.
This is a practice to
Ah, Jesus Christ.
deepening our connections with one another and our world.
Oh, that should take it for you.
After this gong chimes, each of us will spend 5 minutes writing a short poem, just 13 words.
No, it's not coming through.
Of paper is a short prompt to guide you. When you hear the second chime, turn to a neighbor. You two will share and receive the poems you have made. For those of you joining by Zoom, paste your poem in the chat to share it with one another. This is an exercise in non-judgment, both in what you make and what you receive, following Wendell Berry's direction to accept what comes from the silence and make the best of it we can. When your neighbor has shared their poem, thank them. And if you feel so moved, share one word to describe what came up for you in receiving this poem.
unmute and now we're muted, it says. Well, it does, but
I mean,
We will now give and receive today's offering. Please know that this morning, half of the non-pledge offering will be donated to Prairie Flower Children's Center. Prairie Flower has offered nature-based, child-led preschool and after-school programming in Ames for over 25 years. Their mission is to strengthen connections to community and the natural world while nurturing the innate capacities for imagination and wonder, and instilling a sense of unconditional belonging. The other half of the offering supports programs here in our fellowship that make this a community of transformation. We'll pass the basket here in Fellowship Hall. And for those of you at home, you can visit uufames.org/give to make your contribution today. If you are visiting today, please know your presence here is gift enough. There are no unsacred places. There are only sacred places and desecrated places. Poetry connects us to the sacred, even if it does so in unconventional ways. Awe, centering, and transcendence are all feelings and experiences I have had hearing poetry in Unitarian Universalist services and reading poetry on this page. I imagine some of you have experienced this as well. Naomi Shihab Nye, Denise Levertov, Adrienne Rich, and of course Mary Oliver are all among the poets whose words have centered and uncentered me in services of our tradition. The power that poems can wield as sources of deepening is incredible. But the quality of poetry that has moved me the most is its ambiguity, something I think which sets it apart from other inspired creations. I want to explore the power of that ambiguity with you today. Like Mary Karr in our reading this morning, poetry was also a healing balm when I first started reading it intentionally. I could not stand to read any more prose after I finished college. I had spent the previous 4 years studying the humanities and being harder on myself than I needed to. I was tired of prose and a little defeated. I had spent much of those 4 years dreaming of going further into academia, researching, teaching, and of course, reading. But by the time I reached the end of my senior year, I couldn't find the emotional fortitude to continue down that path. But burnt out as I was, I couldn't not read either. Reading has been a great joy and source of sustenance for much of my life. It has been a way of connecting to the ideas and experiences outside of myself, an enriching practice. So I thought if prose I had grown so used to reading in the last few years had worn me out, maybe I should try something different. Poetry proved to be both a balm and a way through. Much of what I read was beautiful and contemplative, and it repaired my love of the written word. It helped me find the space to step away from more prosaic forms of writing so that I could return to them and actually enjoy them. I attribute much of the impact of these poems to their ambiguity. Unlike prosaic writing, poetry is often not concerned with describing things in a matter of fact, this then that, linear, rational way. In her poetry handbook, Mary Oliver describes that sort of informational writing as an antithesis to poetry. Its words are exact, she writes. They do not desire to cast two shadows. The language is cold. It does not reach for any territory beyond the functional. While this sort of writing has its place, many good places even, it leaves out human experiences it cannot touch. Meanwhile, poetry can do what the rational and linear cannot. It can touch the warm places, the experiences that happen, whether we can identify any function for their occurrence or not. Poetry can account for the ambiguity in our lives. Many of the poems I have loved best, that have reached into me the deepest, have an uncanny quality to them. Does this poem capture the poet's first-person point of view or someone else's? Do they describe things that really happened with some creative license, or are they daydreams or something else entirely? You may have felt that uncanniness as you listened to your neighbor's poems earlier. You may find that uncanniness reading poetry or receiving it. Reading and receiving these sorts of poems is a way of practicing the acceptance of ambiguity and still finding beauty and meaning in it. In social work, in ministry, in seminary, I've encountered so many ambiguous stories and situations. Very often when I am working with and listening to someone, I can tell that I'm not getting the full story. And depending on the nature of the relationship, I may never have a chance to get it. Even with people who I have known most of my life, I know that I will not get a complete understanding of every situation they share. Complete and perfect understanding is not mine to demand, and I am called to stay present whether I get that understanding or not. Practicing acceptance of the ambiguous, of the unknown, of the things that stand outside our comprehension is a practice of love, an inarguably sacred practice. This is a lesson poetry can teach us alongside the appreciation of its other deepening qualities. As our time together comes to an end, I want to leave you with these three questions. Carry these with you in this day and the days to come, and see where they lead you. What is poetry trying to teach you? What is trying to teach you to love what you don't understand? What do you love beyond certainty? Our final hymn this morning is 311 in your gray hymnals. Let it be a dance. Please rise in body or in spirit to share in this song. Let it be a dance we do. May our harvest dance with you. Through the good times and the bad times too. Let it be a dance. we close this time together with one last lesson in ambiguity. Love beyond the conviction that you can always have the right words. This is The End of Poetry by Ada Limon. Enough of the osseous and chickadee and sunflower and snowshoes, maple and seeds, samara and shoot. Enough of chiaroscuro, enough of thus and prophecy, and the stoic farmer and faith and our Father and 'tis of thee. Enough of bosom and bud, skin and God, not forgetting and star bodies and frozen birds. Enough of the will to go on or not go on, or how a certain light does a certain thing. Enough of the kneeling and the rising and the looking inward and the looking up. Enough of the gun, the drama, the long lost letter on the dresser. Enough of the longing and the ego and the obliteration of the ego. Enough of the mother and the child and the father and the child. And enough of the pointing to the world weary and desperate. Enough of the brutal and the border. Enough of, can you see me? Enough of, I am human. Enough, I am alone and I am desperate. Enough of the animal saving me. Enough of the high water, enough sorrow, enough air and ease. I am asking you to touch me.
Transcendence, centering, awe. None of these can be found in any one place, in any one word. As they have guided us this time by the light of this chalice, may they guide us in our wider lives. Our service has ended and our lives continue beyond it. Peace, amen, and so may it be.